सेव किया था ना?
मैं सिर्फ इसलिए गया था क्योंकि उसने मुझे कॉल किया, that's it. But listen तो.
Save it for someone else.
जिंदगी में सेव करना जरूरी है, मगर जब बात पैसों की हो, सिर्फ सेविंग से काम नहीं चलेगा। इक्विटी म्यूचुअल फंड्स में इन्वेस्ट कीजिए और अपने सेविंग्स को आगे बढ़ने का मौका दीजिए।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
Hi and welcome to ThePrint this week, and thank you once again for watching Security Code. ThePrint distinguished itself over the years by developing a reputation for granular reporting and high-quality analysis. Maintaining our standard of journalism, though, needs money, and that means the support of subscribers like you. Please take a subscription to ThePrint. The link is in the description below. There were no beheadings, daggers, or pools of blood. The curtain fell on 2 centuries of Durrani imperial rule with an anti-climax unmatched since Borachio confessed his villainy in Shakespeare's play Much Ado About Nothing. The aging king Zahir Shah, in Rome to treat a minor eye condition, exiled himself to Triccia, an idol on the Tyrrhenian Sea. The only casualty was Habibullah Khan Zurmatai, a dashing young army officer of the 4th Brigade who drove his own tank into the Kabul River to avoid hitting a bus. Nice guy, I guess. Even as the king's cousin and Prime Minister Prince Daud Khan declared Afghanistan a republic and began calling himself president, a procession of late-model sedans headed across the border to Peshawar. The 2,000 Royalists exiled in 1973, scholar Parvez Iqbal Cheema recounts, were the very first political refugees to stream into Pakistan from Afghanistan. Last week, Pakistan began pushing back an estimated 1.7 million undocumented migrants into the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, an act of retaliation for the Taliban's failure to stop cross-border jihadist attacks. Prime Minister Anwarul Haq Kakad said the decision was made to punish Afghanistan for its continued support of the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, the jihadist group that's been attacking the Pakistan army and its cities alike. Ever since Kakad's speech, hundreds of thousands of Afghans have been pushed back into their homeland through the Torkham and Chaman border, many sleeping out in the cold until they can make their way to the slums of Kabul, their few possessions confiscated by corrupt border guards. The mass expulsion of Afghans comes amid a tidal wave of violence that threatens to tear Pakistan apart. The violence, though, hasn't been unleashed by refugees. Instead, it's the inexorable outcome of Pakistan's own long war to annihilate the secular, modern Afghanistan that was slowly rising to its north. To retrieve the Afghanistan that was clawing its way towards modernity in the 1960s now needs extraordinary powers of imagination. The country that had women attending university classes and working in offices, flight crew dressed in elegant skirts, and figured as a backdrop for a Vogue fashion shoot, today exists only as a fading photograph or two scattered around the internet. The Afghanistan of the time was desperately poor, just as it is today. Ever since 1928, though, when the Queen Soraya Tarzi tore off her veil in a symbolic assertion of a modern national identity that transcended religion, Afghanistan had begun to change. For Pakistan's post-independence leadership, committed to building a nation around Islam, the idea of autonomy seemed an existential threat. From 1953 to 1963, Afghan support for Pashtun autonomy and regional identity led Pakistan to impose a ban on transit from Karachi to the landlocked country and periodic breaks in diplomatic relations. The rise of former Pakistan Prime Minister Zulfikar Ali Bhutto saw fresh tensions break out. In 1970, the Pashtun nationalist National Awami Party together with the Jamiat Ulema-e-Islam, formed the provisional governments in the northwest frontier province, which is today called Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, and in Balochistan. Prime Minister Zulfikar dismissed these provincial governments, sparking off an insurgency. Leaders of the NAP, like Ajmal Khan Khattak, took refuge in Kabul, according to the historian Khalid Humayun Nadiri. Leaders of the Islamist movement in Afghanistan, scholar Ijaz Ahmad Khan, were in turn granted safe haven in Peshawar after the 1973 coup. Figures like Gulbuddin Hikmatyar, Burhanuddin Rabbani, and Ahmad Shah Massoud began staging raids against President Dawood's regime, organized by then Inter-Services Intelligence Brigadier Nasirullah Khan Babar. The so-called Saur Revolution of 1978, which saw Dawood and much of his family butchered inside the Arg Royal Palace in Kabul, brought a socialist government to power led by Nur Muhammad Taraki. The brutal fighting this sparked off eventually led the Soviet Union to commit forces inside Afghanistan in 1979. General Zia-ul Haq's military regime allied with the United States to wage war against the Soviet Union, using the Islamist factions to raise armies of jihadists for this anti-communist crusade. Even as millions of refugees fled into Pakistan to escape the fighting, as Afghanistan's cities and rural infrastructure were destroyed in savage fighting, Islamabad ensured its Islamist proxies maintained tight control of these new refugees. All refugees had to be registered through one of the 7 so-called Mujahideen religious groups, scholar Maya Safri has written, in order to be eligible for aid. Following 9/11, as its Taliban clients fled across the border, Pakistan began to argue that the refugee camps were the source of its own security problems. Large refugee camps like Kachagadi, Zari Noor and Jalozai were demolished. Families were given one-time payments to go back to Afghanistan of up to $100 for 5 members. Alternative camps were offered in remote regions like Dir and Chitral, Safri notes, but most who left ended up in the shanty towns that were rapidly growing around Kabul's periphery. The United Nations says it repatriated over 4 million refugees from Pakistan to Afghanistan between 2002 and 2022. But there is a lot of anecdotal evidence which suggests many simply cycled back as migrant workers, especially after the withdrawal of the United States ended the short-lived economic boom in Afghanistan. Large numbers of Afghan refugee families, as Sophie Landon reports, had no relatives left in their home country anymore after decades of war. That made it impossible for them to relocate and live productive economic lives. Even as it evicted Afghan refugees, Islamabad continued to pursue a policy of accommodation with ethnic Pashtun and ethnic Punjabi jihadists at home. The journalist Dawood Khattak has recorded that military ruler General Pervez Musharraf alone signed a peace agreement with Commander Naik Muhammad Wazir soon after 9/11, ceding local power in return for ending attacks on the Pakistan army. In 2005, there was another deal with jihadist warlord Baitullah Masood. The third happened in Swat and several more one after another in 2008-2009. Islamabad was eventually forced to go to war against the TTP in 2014 after the country found itself besieged by jihadists. The peace deals just hadn't worked, that made the problem worse. The TTP was pushed back across the border, and when the Islamic Emirate took power, Islamabad and the ISI hoped its proxy government would ensure these jihadists returned home as loyal clients of Pakistan. Think again. Soon after the fall of Kabul, former Prime Minister Imran Khan's government began relocating jihadists in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, ceding them mini emirates in the hope of buying peace. The implosion of this misguided policy became clear early this month when jihadists overran the Miawali Air Force Base, killing several military personnel and destroying Karakoram 8, Super Mushak and F-7P fighter pilot training jets. 14 soldiers are reported to have been killed in separate ambushes near Gwadar port. Large-scale killings of security force personnel in the ethnic Pashtun lands of northern Balochistan as well as around Gwadar have surged to levels not seen in years, monitoring by the South Asia Terrorism Portal shows. Even though the Islamic Emirate, that is the Afghan Taliban, has instructed its cadre not to participate in jihadist operations inside Pakistan, it's either unwilling or unable to rein in the jihadists of the TTP or the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan. The journalists Ihsanillah Tipu Mehsood and Iftikhar Firdaus noted earlier this year that rival jihadist groups in Pakistan were in fact coalescing and joining together, sensing an opportunity to expand their power in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and Balochistan as the Pakistan army and state fall apart due to financial crisis. Though many recent jihadist attacks have been claimed by the Tehreek-e-Jihad Pakistan, a new organization, experts concur that this TJP is just a brand name for the TTP, intended to distance the Islamic Emirate from responsibility for events in Pakistan. Like the Islamic State and Al-Qaeda, the TJP says it is committed to a global jihadist agenda for which Pakistan is a stepping stone. According to TJP propaganda, it takes inspiration from the anti-colonial silk letter movement of Deobandi clerics. The TJP says it has, quote, reached the conclusion that except through armed jihad, the enforcement of an Islamic system is not possible in Pakistan. For the achievement of this objective for the time being, and I quote again, hundreds of mujahideen and dozens of fidain of Islam are ever ready. Expelling powerless Afghan refugees who have very little to do with the TJP might pander to chauvinists in Pakistan who have long scapegoated refugees for jihadist violence. The roots of the crisis, though, lie in the Pakistani state's religious nationalism and the war its intelligence services have long waged against secular nationalist Pashtun forces. The seeds of war sowed by the ISI in 1973 have bloomed into a long, bitter harvest, which now threatens to overrun Pakistan itself. I'm Praveen Swami and I'm a contributing editor to ThePrint. Thank you again for watching Security Code.